The Galactic Council chamber was filled with the usual sounds of boredom and paperwork. Ambassador Velthorax sat in his designated seat and tried not to fall asleep during another pointless discussion about trade regulations. His blue-scaled fingers tapped against the armrest as he counted the minutes until this session would finally end. Around him sat representatives from 40 different species, and each one looked just as bored as he felt. The chamber itself was impressive with its high ceilings and floating light spheres, but after attending these meetings for 20 years, the beauty had long since faded into routine. Nobody seemed to notice that the human seat was empty again. This was the third month in a row that Ambassador Daniel Brooks had failed to appear at the council sessions. A few representatives whispered about it during breaks, but most just shrugged and moved on to the next item on the endless agenda. The humans had always been a bit odd anyway, and their absence was not considered particularly concerning. They probably had some internal political drama to deal with, or perhaps they were busy with one of their numerous scientific projects. Council member Kiratha mentioned it briefly during a lull in the proceedings. Her crystalline body shimmered under the chamber lights as she spoke in her melodic voice about how the humans might simply be dealing with domestic issues. The other council members nodded in agreement, and that was the end of the discussion. After all, the humans had been reliable members of the Galactic Council for 40 years now, and a few missed meetings were hardly cause for alarm. They would show up eventually, and probably apologize for their absence with some elaborate explanation that nobody would really care about. What none of them knew was that 6 months ago, everything had changed for humanity. Captain Helen Martinez had been commanding the exploration vessel Wanderer on a routine deep space survey mission when her science officer detected something impossible. The readings showed a gravitational anomaly that should not exist according to any known physics. Helen ordered her ship closer to investigate, and what they found would alter the course of human history forever. It was a wormhole, but not the unstable, dangerous kind that ships avoided. This one was perfectly stable and massive enough to allow even the largest vessels to pass through safely. Helen sent a probe through first following standard protocol. The data that came back was stunning. On the other side of the wormhole was another galaxy entirely, and the probe had detected dozens of star systems within scanning range. More importantly, the probe found breathable atmospheres on multiple planets and no signs of intelligent life anywhere. Helen immediately classified the discovery at the highest security level and set course back to Earth. She knew that this information could not be shared with the Galactic Council. Commander Ryan Foster was chosen to lead the first manned expedition through the wormhole. He was a veteran explorer with 15 years of experience in deep space operations, and more importantly, he was someone the military trusted completely. Ryan took 3 ships through the wormhole and spent 2 months surveying the new galaxy. What he found exceeded every expectation. There were thousands of habitable worlds just waiting to be colonized. Resources were abundant beyond measure, and there was not a single alien species to negotiate with or answer to. Ryan sent his report back to Earth through a secure quantum link. He described planets with pristine oceans and continents of fertile soil. He reported asteroid fields rich with rare metals that would take centuries to deplete. He documented gas giants perfect for fuel harvesting and moons that could serve as industrial bases. Most importantly, he emphasized one crucial fact over and over in his report. This galaxy was empty and humanity could claim it all without interference from anyone. President Laura Bennett read the report 3 times before calling an emergency meeting of her top advisors. The conversation lasted for 6 hours, and by the end of it, the decision had been made. Humanity would leave the Galactic Council and relocate to this new galaxy. It would be done quietly and carefully with no announcement or explanation. They would simply vanish and leave the Council to figure out what happened on their own. The plan was ambitious and required perfect coordination across every human government and military organization. First, the military would establish forward bases in the new galaxy to ensure security and set up infrastructure. Then colony ships would begin transporting civilians in waves, starting with volunteers and essential personnel. Earth would maintain a skeleton crew to keep up appearances for as long as possible. Automated systems would handle most communications with other species, and pre-recorded messages would buy them time. Within 3 months, the first major transport began. Military vessels carried personnel and equipment through the wormhole in a steady stream. The coordinates were known only to the highest levels of command, and every person who went through signed agreements never to reveal the location. Massive colony ships called the Ark series were constructed in secret orbital facilities far from prying eyes. Each one could carry 50,000 people in suspended animation along with everything needed to establish a new settlement. Earth's population began to drop, but slowly enough that it would not trigger immediate alarms. 8 billion became 7 billion, and official statements blamed it on a new colonization initiative in the outer solar system. Then 7 billion became 6 billion, and the government cited economic migration to Mars and Europa. The truth was that millions of humans were boarding ships every week and disappearing through a wormhole that the rest of the galaxy did not know existed. Lieutenant Kevin Nash volunteered to stay behind as part of the skeleton crew. He understood that his job was to maintain the illusion of normalcy for as long as possible. Kevin would greet any alien visitors with a smile and a plausible excuse. He would file the routine reports that the council expected and make sure that trade shipments continued to flow, even if they were just automated cargo freighters with no human crew. His sacrifice meant that millions of others could escape to freedom. The exodus continued for over a year. Space stations were quietly abandoned after their populations were evacuated. Mining colonies in the asteroid belt shut down one by one. Research facilities transmitted their final data and then went dark. Every day, fewer humans remained in the galaxy, and every day the new galaxy grew more populated with thriving settlements. President Bennett watched the reports come in and felt satisfaction knowing that humanity was finally free from the bureaucracy and condescension of the Galactic Council. Nobody in the Council noticed because they had stopped paying attention to humanity years ago. The humans were just another member species and not a particularly important one. They attended meetings when required and voted on resolutions and contributed to scientific databases. Nothing about them seemed special or worthy of close observation. That indifference was exactly what humanity had counted on, and it was working perfectly. The first sign that something was wrong came from the Vexorian Consortium, and it arrived in the form of an angry merchant standing in front of the Galactic Council demanding answers. His name was Krelnak, and he had built his entire business empire on reliable trade with human manufacturers. 3 months ago, he had placed an order for 15,000 industrial fabricators that were supposed to be delivered to his mining colonies in the Outer Rim. The delivery date had come and gone with no explanation. Krelnak had tried contacting the Human Trade Ministry dozens of times but received only automated responses telling him that his inquiry had been received and would be processed soon. Ambassador Velthorax listened to the complaint with growing concern. He had known Krelnak for years, and the merchant was not someone who complained lightly. If he was standing before the council making formal accusations, then something serious was happening. Velthorax pulled up the trade records on his data tablet, and what he saw troubled him deeply. The humans had never missed a delivery deadline in 40 years of galactic commerce. They were obsessively punctual about such things and took great pride in their reputation for reliability. Yet according to the records, there were now over 200 outstanding orders from various species, all waiting for human-manufactured goods that had not arrived. The council voted to send an investigation team to Earth to determine what was causing these delays. The Vexorians insisted on sending their own delegation as well, since they had the most to lose financially. 3 weeks later, a small fleet of ships arrived in the Sol system and requested permission to land at Earth's primary spaceport. Traffic control granted permission immediately, but the controller's voice sounded strange over the communications channel. It was tired and almost relieved, as if the person speaking had been waiting for someone to finally show up and ask questions. The delegation landed in what used to be New York City's main spaceport. The facility was fully operational with all systems running perfectly, but something felt deeply wrong about the place. The massive landing platforms could accommodate hundreds of ships, but only a handful were docked there. The terminal buildings were lit up and climate-controlled, but when the delegates walked through them, they found the corridors empty and silent. There were no crowds of travelers receiving to catch flights, no vendors selling food or souvenirs, no announcements echoing through the public address system. Just empty space and the hum of air circulation fans. Lieutenant Kevin Nash met them at the main entrance wearing his full diplomatic uniform. He smiled warmly and shook hands with each delegate using the appropriate greeting gestures for their species. Kevin had been briefed extensively on how to handle this exact situation, and he delivered his prepared explanation smoothly. There had been some unexpected complications in the supply chain, he told them. A major manufacturing hub had experienced technical difficulties and production had been temporarily halted. The fabricators would be delivered within 2 cycles, and the human government apologized for any inconvenience caused. The Vexorian delegation leader seemed satisfied with this explanation, but his scanning equipment told a different story. His handheld sensor was designed to measure electromagnetic signatures and population densities in urban areas. New York City should have been lighting up his display like a sun, with millions of people generating heat and electrical activity. Instead, the readings showed almost nothing. The power grid was active, but actual life signs were minimal. It was as if the entire city had been abandoned except for a skeleton maintenance crew. Kevin escorted the delegates through a carefully prepared tour of government facilities. Every building they visited was clean and operational, but conspicuously empty of personnel. When asked where everyone was, Kevin had ready answers. Many departments were working remotely now, he explained. There had been a push toward decentralization of government services. Some staff were on vacation or attending conferences on other human colonies. Each excuse sounded plausible on its own, but together they painted a picture that did not make sense. After the delegation departed, Kevin sent an encrypted message to President Bennett. The Vexorians were suspicious, and it was only a matter of time before other species started asking questions. The charade could not continue much longer. Bennett received the message and nodded to herself. They had bought enough time. Most of the civilian population had already been evacuated, and the military installations in the new galaxy were fully established. Even if the Council discovered the truth now, there was nothing they could do to stop what had already happened. Ambassador Velthorax received the delegation's report and felt a cold dread settle into his stomach. He was not a foolish person, and he could read between the lines of their carefully worded findings. Something catastrophic was happening to humanity, and they were hiding it from the galaxy. His first thought was plague or environmental disaster, but that did not explain why the humans would be so secretive about it. Species helped each other during emergencies, and the Council had resources that could assist with almost any crisis. He decided to investigate further on his own. Velthorax accessed the long-range sensor network that monitored activity throughout the galaxy. The system was designed to track shipping movements and detect potential security threats, but it also provided detailed data on energy consumption and population centers. He pulled up the information for human-controlled space and studied it carefully. What he found made his scales prickle with alarm. Every human colony showed dramatically reduced electromagnetic signatures. Mars, which had housed over 2 million people, was now operating at less than 10% of its normal output. Europa's underwater cities were running on minimum power, with most sections completely dark. The massive space station orbiting Titan was broadcasting automated maintenance signals but showed no signs of actual habitation. Mining operations throughout the asteroid belt had been shut down entirely, with equipment left in place but no workers present to operate. Velthorax compiled all of this data into a report and requested an emergency meeting with the Council leadership. He presented his findings to a small group of senior members in a private chamber away from the main assembly. The evidence was undeniable. Humanity was conducting a massive evacuation of their entire population from this galaxy. The question was, where were they going and why had they chosen to leave without telling anyone? The Council chair was a towering being from the Archon collective named Zarthun. He studied the data for a long time before speaking. His voice was deep and resonant and carried the weight of centuries of experience. This was unprecedented, he said. Species did not simply abandon their territories and disappear. There had to be a rational explanation. Perhaps the humans had discovered a terrible threat that they were fleeing from. Perhaps they had found something valuable that they wanted to keep secret. Whatever the reason, the Council needed answers immediately. A formal resolution was passed that same day. An official diplomatic mission would travel to Earth and demand a meeting with the highest levels of human government. They would not accept automated responses or excuses from low-level functionaries. Someone in authority would explain what was happening and why humanity appeared to be abandoning this galaxy. The mission would depart within the week and would consist of representatives from 6 major species including Velthorax himself. As the meeting adjourned, Velthorax stared out the window at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, 8 billion humans were going to a destination that nobody in this galaxy knew about. They had planned this carefully and executed it with precision. Whatever their reasons for leaving, the humans had outsmarted the entire Galactic Council, and that realization troubled him more than anything else. The Council's diplomatic cruiser was the largest and most advanced vessel in their fleet, and it carried representatives from 6 different species, all demanding answers from humanity. Ambassador Velthorax stood on the bridge, watching the blue marble of Earth grow larger in the viewport as they approached. He had visited this world many times over the years and had always found it vibrant and full of energy. The planet generated more radio signals and electromagnetic noise than almost any other inhabited world in the galaxy. But now, as their sensors swept across the surface, something felt terribly wrong. The communication signals were still there, but they were repetitive and automated. The same messages playing over and over with no variation or personality behind them. Traffic control granted them landing permission in Geneva, where the human government maintained its council liaison offices. The voice that spoke to them was polite and professional, but it had the flat quality of a computer program rather than a living being. Velthorax exchanged glances with the other delegates and saw his own concerns reflected in their expressions. They landed at the spaceport without incident and found ground transportation waiting for them as protocol required. The vehicles were clean and well-maintained and drove them through the city streets toward the government district. What they saw through the windows made every delegate fall silent. Geneva had been a bustling city of 500,000 people the last time Velthorax visited. Now the streets were empty. Buildings stood intact with their windows clean and their systems operational, but there were no pedestrians on the sidewalks, no vehicles moving through intersections, no signs of life anywhere except for the occasional maintenance robot performing its programmed duties. The liaison office building was a modern structure of glass and steel that stood at the heart of the diplomatic quarter. The main entrance opened automatically as they approached, and climate-controlled air washed over them as they stepped inside. The lobby was immaculate with polished floors and artistic displays showcasing human achievements in science and culture. But there was nobody at the reception desk. No security guards checking credentials. No staff members hurrying between meetings. Just emptiness and silence broken only by the soft hum of the building's environmental systems. They made their way to the main conference room on the 3rd floor, following the signs posted in multiple languages. The door was unlocked and swung open easily when Velthorax pressed the control panel. Inside, they found a large table surrounded by comfortable chairs and wall-mounted displays ready for presentations. Everything was exactly as it should be for a high-level diplomatic meeting, except for one detail. In the center of the conference table sat a single data chip. The Vexorian delegate picked it up carefully and examined it with his scanning equipment. It was genuine human technology and contained a recorded message that had been placed here deliberately for them to find. He inserted the chip into the room's playback system and stepped back as the holographic projector came to life. A human woman appeared standing in the center of the table. She wore a military uniform with colonel's insignia on her shoulders, and her expression was calm and composed. Her name was Amy Peterson, according to the identification tag visible on her uniform. She looked directly at where the delegates were standing, as if she could see them even though the recording had obviously been made weeks or months earlier. When she spoke, her voice was clear and carried the tone of someone who had thought very carefully about every word she was about to say. She began with formal greetings in the traditional council style, acknowledging each species present by name. Then she got to the point without wasting time on pleasantries. By the time they were watching this message essay, he explained humanity would have completed its departure from this galaxy. They were leaving behind all of their infrastructure and buildings and diplomatic facilities. Everything would remain functional and intact for whoever wanted to claim it. But the people themselves would be gone. Amy explained that this decision had not been made lightly or in anger. Humanity had been members of the Galactic Council for 40 years, and during that time they had contributed enormously to galactic civilization. They had shared their technology freely. They had volunteered for dangerous missions. They had mediated disputes and provided aid to species in need. But throughout all of those years, they had never been treated as true equals by the older civilizations. Every proposal humans made in council sessions was met with condescension. Every scientific breakthrough they achieved was dismissed as lucky accidents. Every time they tried to contribute to important decisions, they were told that they did not understand how things worked because they were too young as a species. The other civilizations spoke to humans the way adults speak to children and expected gratitude for being allowed to sit at the table with their betters. Amy's voice remained steady, but there was an edge to it now as she continued. Humanity had discovered an opportunity, she said, a place where they could build their own future without needing to constantly prove themselves to species that had already decided humans were inferior. It was not about running away from problems. It was about choosing to invest their energy in something better, rather than fighting for scraps of respect that would never truly be given. She made it clear that humanity was not interested in revenge or causing harm to the council. They simply wanted to be left alone to pursue their own destiny. All existing trade agreements would be honored through automated systems for the next 6 months, to give other species time to find alternative suppliers. All scientific data that humans had collected would remain accessible through the council databases. Any species that wanted to settle on former human worlds would find them empty and ready for colonization. The recording went on for 20 minutes, covering every detail of the transition and answering questions that the delegates had not even thought to ask yet. Amy spoke about the logistics of the evacuation and the timeline that had been followed. She mentioned that a small volunteer crew had remained behind to maintain appearances for as long as possible and thanked them for their sacrifice. She provided contact protocols for emergency situations, though she made it clear that humanity would not be responding to requests for their return. When the message finally ended, the hologram faded and the conference room fell silent. The delegates looked at each other with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to anger. The Xanthari ambassador was the first to speak, and his voice was shaking with rage. This was unacceptable, he declared. Humanity could not simply abandon their territories and responsibilities. They had obligations under council law and treaties that were binding across generations. But Velthorax was already shaking his head. He had studied council law extensively during his decades of service, and he knew the truth that the others had not yet accepted. There was no legal mechanism to force a species to remain in the council. Every member joined voluntarily and could theoretically leave voluntarily. It had never happened before because no species had ever wanted to leave. The benefits of council membership were considered too valuable to give up. Until now. The delegates spent 3 more days on Earth searching for any remaining humans who could provide more information. They visited government buildings and research facilities and military bases. Everything was empty. They found automated systems maintaining power grids and water treatment plants and transportation networks. They found robots tending gardens and cleaning streets and repairing infrastructure. But they found no people anywhere. On the 4th day, they admitted defeat and returned to their ship. As they left Earth's orbit, Velthorax took one last look at the planet through the viewport. Somewhere out there beyond the reach of council sensors, 8 billion humans were starting a new life. They had outplayed every species in the galaxy, and done it so quietly that nobody had noticed until it was too late. He felt something that surprised him. It was not anger or resentment. It was respect. The emergency sessions at council headquarters ran continuously for 2 weeks after the delegation returned from Earth. Every available representative was called in, and every expert who might have insights into the situation was consulted. The massive chamber that usually hosted boring discussions about trade regulations now buzzed with urgent conversations and heated debates. Nobody could agree on what should be done or even if anything could be done at all. The humans were gone, and they had left behind more questions than answers. Ambassador Velthorax attended every session and watched as his fellow council members slowly progressed through stages of denial and anger, and finally toward something resembling acceptance. The Xanthari wanted to mount a military expedition to find humanity and force them to return. The Archons argued for economic sanctions, though nobody could explain how you sanctioned a species that had removed itself from your economy. The Vexorians were too busy calculating their financial losses to contribute much to the strategic discussions. It was during the 3rd week of emergency sessions that Dr. Lisa Chang appeared before the council. She was human, and she was one of the volunteers who had stayed behind specifically to deliver a message that nobody wanted to hear. Lisa was a xenotechnologist who had spent 20 years working on collaborative research projects between humans and other species. She knew more about the interconnections between human and galactic technology than perhaps anyone else alive, and she had been authorized by the departed human government to explain exactly what the council had lost. Lisa stood at the speaker's podium in the center of the chamber and looked up at the hundreds of representatives seated in tiered rows around her. She activated the holographic display system and began her presentation without any preliminary pleasantries. The first image that appeared showed molecular diagrams of various pharmaceutical compounds. These were medications that humans had developed over the past 40 years, she explained. Each one treated diseases that affected non-human species. The formulas had been shared freely with council medical databases and were now used across dozens of worlds. She listed them one by one. A treatment for Xanthari bone rot that had reduced mortality rates by 70%. A cure for Vexorian neural degradation that had been considered incurable before human researchers found the solution. Medications that helped Archon collective members maintain stable consciousness during long space voyages. Therapies for at least 15 different species, and none of them had been patented or sold for profit. Humans had simply given them away because they believed that medical knowledge should be freely available to anyone who needed it. The next slide showed surgical techniques and medical procedures. Human doctors had pioneered 17 major advances in xenosurgery that were now standard practice in hospitals throughout the galaxy. They had developed new imaging technologies that could scan through the various types of tissue that different species possessed. They had created surgical tools designed to work with the unique anatomies of creatures that human hands would never need to operate on themselves. All of this knowledge had been shared through medical journals and training programs that humans had organized and funded. Lisa moved on to engineering and technology. Human engineers had designed the power coupling systems that 60% of all council vessels now used in their faster-than-light drives. Those systems were more efficient and more reliable than anything that had existed before humans joined the galactic community. Human programmers had written the translation algorithms that allowed the Council's Universal Translator Network to function. Before those algorithms, communication between some species had been difficult or impossible because their languages were too fundamentally different. The presentation continued for over an hour. With each new category, Lisa revealed another way that humans had quietly become essential to the functioning of galactic civilization. They had volunteered to explore dangerous regions of space that other species considered too risky. They had established first contact protocols that reduced conflicts with newly discovered civilizations. They had created educational programs that helped developing species integrate into galactic society. They had built trading networks that connected remote colonies to major commercial centers. Then Lisa pulled up the statistics that made everyone in the chamber fall silent. In the past 40 years, humans had represented only 4% of the total council population. But they had accounted for 37% of all scientific papers published in council databases. They had conducted 42% of all first contact missions with newly discovered species. They had provided 58% of all humanitarian aid delivered to worlds suffering from natural disasters or economic collapse. The numbers were irrefutable, and they painted a picture that none of the council members wanted to see. Humanity had not been a minor participant in galactic civilization. They had been one of its primary engines of PR, progress, and innovation. While the older species had been content to maintain the status quo, humans had been pushing boundaries and solving problems and generally making things better for everyone, and they had done it all while being treated as the junior members who should be grateful for being allowed to participate. Lisa's voice took on a harder edge as she reached the conclusion of her presentation. She wanted to make sure that the council understood something important, she said. Humans had not left because they were weak or afraid. They had left because they were strong enough to build something better elsewhere. They had tried for 40 years to be good members of this community, and they had contributed more than their fair share. But they had finally decided that their energy and creativity would be better spent in a place where they would not have to constantly fight for basic respect, she explained. That the human government had known this departure would cause disruptions. That was why they had left behind detailed documentation on every technology they had shared. All of the medical formulas were still in the databases. All of the engineering specifications were still accessible. The knowledge itself had not been taken away. But the people who had created that knowledge and who would have continued creating more were gone. The council could try to replicate human innovation, but that would require them to actually value the kind of creative thinking that they had spent 40 years dismissing as naive or reckless. When Lisa finished speaking, she answered questions from the council members for another 2 hours. Most of the questions were predictable. Could humanity be convinced to return? No. Did they leave any way to contact them? Only for genuine emergencies, and the definition of emergency would be determined by humans, not by the council. Was there any possibility of finding their new location? Extremely unlikely, since they had clearly taken extensive precautions to hide their destination. The final question came from Ambassador Velthorax himself. He asked Lisa why she had stayed behind when she could have gone with the others to their new home. She smiled sadly and explained that someone needed to help the council understand what had happened. She had volunteered for this duty because she still believed in the ideals that the council claimed to represent. She hoped that maybe this experience would teach the older species to treat newcomers with more respect in the future, but she was not optimistic. After the session ended, Velthorax returned to his private office and sat in darkness for a long time. He thought about all the times he had dismissed human proposals in council meetings. All the times he had smiled condescendingly when human representatives got excited about some new discovery. All the times he had voted against human initiatives because they seemed too ambitious or too different from how things had always been done. He had never been cruel or deliberately insulting. He had just treated them the way everyone else did, like children who would eventually learn to be more reasonable. The reports kept coming in over the following weeks, and each one made the situation clearer. The galactic economy was experiencing significant disruptions. Supply chains that humans had maintained were breaking down. Trade routes that human ships had patrolled were becoming dangerous as pirates moved in. Scientific conferences were noticeably less productive without human researchers asking their strange questions and proposing their unusual theories. Even the council sessions themselves felt different without the human delegation present to challenge conventional thinking. 3 minor wars broke out in sectors where human peacekeepers had previously maintained stability through a combination of mediation and the threat of their surprisingly effective military force. The council tried to fill the gap by deploying their own peacekeeping forces, but they lacked the human ability to understand both sides of a conflict and find creative compromises. Things that humans had made look easy turned out to be extremely difficult when others tried to do them. 17 species filed formal complaints about economic damages caused by humanity's departure. The Vexorian Consortium was facing bankruptcy and had requested emergency financial assistance from the Council. 2 developing civilizations that had been receiving human aid and technical support were now struggling without that help. The costs were adding up, and there was no clear solution because you could not force someone to care about problems they had chosen to leave behind. 1 full year had passed since humanity departed, and the Galactic Council was still struggling to adapt to their absence. Ambassador Velthorax sat in his office late at night reviewing reports that painted an increasingly grim picture of galactic affairs. The economic impact had been worse than anyone predicted. Trade networks that had operated smoothly for decades were now plagued by inefficiencies and disputes. Scientific research had slowed dramatically without human contributions. The optimism and energy that humans had brought to every project they touched was simply gone, and nobody else seemed capable of replacing it. The latest report on his desk described another diplomatic crisis in the Outer Rim. 2 species were on the brink of war over mining rights to an asteroid field. In the past, a human mediator would have been dispatched within days and would have found some creative solution that satisfied both parties. Now the council was sending a committee that would probably spend months debating protocol while the situation escalated. Velthorax rubbed his tired eyes and wondered, not for the first time, if the council had learned anything from this experience. The search for humanity's new location had been called off after 9 months of failure. Long-range probes had been sent to every nearby galaxy and had found nothing. Intelligence agencies had chased down every possible lead and came up empty. The humans had covered their tracks with impressive thoroughness. They had clearly planned this exodus for years and had thought of every detail. Even the handful of humans who remained behind, like Dr. Lisa Chang, claimed to have no knowledge of the exact coordinates. They had been deliberately kept in the dark to prevent exactly this kind of search. The Council had finally issued an official statement acknowledging humanity's departure. It was carefully worded to avoid admitting any mistakes or accepting responsibility for why the humans had chosen to leave. The statement wished humanity well in their future endeavors and expressed hope that perhaps one day relations could be restored. Privately, every council member knew it was meaningless diplomatic language. The humans were not coming back, and everyone understood why, even if nobody wanted to say it out loud. Meanwhile, in a galaxy designated NGC 7331 by the old astronomical catalogs, humanity was thriving beyond anyone's wildest expectations. President Laura Bennett stood on the observation deck of humanity's Hope Station and watched the construction crews working on the newest orbital facility. In just 1 year, they had established 37 colony worlds. The population was growing at rates not seen since the early days of Earth's history. Young couples were having children with enthusiasm, knowing that their kids would grow up in a society built on human values without interference from condescending alien civilizations. Admiral Helen Martinez joined Laura at the viewport, and together they watched a transport ship depart toward one of the new colonies. Helen had been the one who discovered the wormhole, and she still felt a sense of pride every time she saw another ship carrying humans to their new home. She had been worried at first that people would resent being uprooted from Earth, but the opposite had happened. Most humans were thrilled to be free from the Council's bureaucracy and were eager to build something new. Laura asked Helen if she had any regrets about how they had handled the departure. Helen thought about it for a moment before answering. She said that leaving quietly had been the right choice. If they had announced their intentions, the Council would have tried to stop them, or at least slow them down with endless negotiations and legal challenges. By the time anyone noticed what was happening, it was already too late to interfere. It had been necessary to be deceptive, but it had also been the smart move. Down on the surface of New Terra, the first colony established in the new galaxy, ordinary humans were building extraordinary things. Jacob Miller had been a farmer in Iowa before the Exodus, and now he was cultivating alien soil that proved to be incredibly fertile. His crops grew faster and larger than anything he had produced on Earth. He sold his surplus to the growing settlements nearby and was already planning to expand his farm. Life was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way that his old existence had never been. Sarah Mitchell had been a civil engineer in Seattle, and now she was designing entire cities from scratch. Without the need to work around existing infrastructure or comply with regulations written by species who thought they knew better, she could implement ideas that had never been possible before. Her designs incorporated lessons learned from 40 years of living among aliens, but adapted them to purely human needs and preferences. The cities she created were beautiful and functional, and completely original. Christine Lee taught at a school in the capital city of New Terra, where the first generation of children born in this galaxy were beginning their education. She made sure to teach them about Earth and about the Galactic Council, and about why humanity had chosen to come here. The children listened with wide eyes as she explained how their parents and grandparents had traveled through a wormhole to find a new home. She wanted them to understand their history, but also to appreciate the freedom they now had to shape their own future. Back in the old galaxy, the Galactic Council held a special memorial session to acknowledge the first anniversary of humanity's departure. Representatives from every species gave speeches about the contributions humans had made and expressed sadness at their loss. It was all very formal and proper and completely meaningless. Everyone knew that if humanity appeared tomorrow and asked to rejoin the Council, they would be welcomed back with the same condescending attitudes that had driven them away in the first place. Nothing had fundamentally changed, except now there was a human-shaped hole in galactic civilization that nobody knew how to fill. Ambassador Velthorax did not attend the memorial session. Instead, he sat alone in his office and composed a personal message that would never be sent, because there was no address to send it to. He wrote about how the Council had taken humanity for granted, how they had assumed that humans needed the galactic community more than the community needed humans, how they had been so confident in their own superiority that they never stopped to consider what they might be losing. He wrote about regret and missed opportunities and lessons learned too late. The truth that nobody wanted to admit was simple and painful. The Galactic Council had not just lost a member species, they had lost their most innovative and energetic contributors. They had lost the people who volunteered for dangerous jobs and came up with creative solutions and pushed everyone else to be better. They had lost the species that treated every challenge as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. And they had lost all of this because they were too proud to treat humans as equals. Dr. Lisa Chang remained on Earth for 6 months after the final ships departed, before she too was granted permission to join the others in the new galaxy. She had completed her mission of helping the Council understand what happened. Whether they would actually learn from the experience remained to be seen, but she had done everything she could. When her ship passed through the wormhole, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was going home to a place where humans were building their own destiny. The wormhole itself remained a closely guarded secret. Only a handful of people in the new galaxy knew its exact location, and the coordinates were stored in encrypted files that required authorization from the President herself to access. There were discussions about whether the wormhole should be collapsed entirely to prevent any possibility of the Council finding it, but ultimately the decision was made to leave it open. It was humanity's gateway to their old home, and someday far in the future there might be reasons to use it again. Centuries would pass before the Galactic Council encountered humanity again. By that time, humans would have built a civilization spanning hundreds of worlds in their new galaxy. They would have technologies that made Council science look primitive. They would have a population that dwarfed most Council species. And they would have a confidence that came from proving they did not need the approval or guidance of anyone else to succeed. But that was still far in the future. For now, in the present moment, the Council sat in their grand chambers and dealt with problems that seemed harder to solve without humans around to help. Trade routes continued to deteriorate. Scientific progress slowed to a crawl. Diplomatic crises escalated into conflicts. Everything that humans had made look easy revealed itself to be incredibly difficult. Ambassador Velthorax finally accepted the truth that he had been avoiding for months. Humanity had not departed in weakness or fear. They had left because they were strong enough and smart enough to recognize when they were being held back. They had given the Council 40 years to treat them with respect, and when that respect never came, they simply walked away to find something better. It was not revenge or punishment. It was just rational self-interest, and somewhere in a distant galaxy that the Council would never find, 8 billion humans were building a future that belonged entirely to them. They worked and built and grew without anyone telling them they were too young or too impulsive or too different. They made mistakes and learned from them and kept pushing forward. They were finally free to be themselves without apology or compromise. The Galactic Council realized too late what had happened. They had not lost subjects or subordinates. They had lost partners who had carried more weight than anyone acknowledged. And now, sitting in the empty spaces that humans used to fill, they understood the cost of their arrogance. But understanding came too late to matter because humanity was gone and they were never coming back.